Okay, all right then. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thanks for having me in today's session as well. Oops. Like the title goes, this webinar will be discussing about Docker, but not as DevOps engineers, but as developers and software engineers, and why we Docker is also important to us, and how we can best integrate Docker into our workflows. So I think with that, I will go over the agenda for the workshop. So we'll be looking at like some of the pain points that we have as developers when it comes to environment setups and our day-to-day lives and how we work. And then we'll briefly look at Docker, and then we'll discuss about why Docker is important to everybody, not just developers. We'll look at some of its benefits. We'll look at some real-life examples. I'll also we'll have a bit of interaction. We have some demo projects that we'll play around with and just see how things work. And then we'll also look at like the impacts this has, like Docker as a whole has on like developers. And then we'll have some closing remarks and then call to actions for everybody. So it's brief, and hopefully it gets the point across as to the why Docker is important to us in general, not just DevOps engineers. With that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Usmaila Abdoul, as Stefan mentioned. I have over 4 years of experience as a software engineer working in the industry with remote first companies. I have worked on quite a number of projects as a result of this. A brief about what my company does. We work with multiple different clients across the industry in different countries in the world, and we take on these projects, work on them as teams, and like ship features and like bug fixes, and a lot of improvements for different clients. And like one thing that we are exposed to here is like we work on a lot of different projects, and different projects have different setup environments. So currently I am managing like 2 clients. One is a mobile application called Engr for a company in Germany. And there we are working on a mobile application, but we need the servers running, and the client doesn't have a staging environment. So what that leaves us with is we need to set up the local backend environments on our systems before we can run the mobile application, where we need to work on features, improvements, and whatever the client wants us to. And here we are exposed with like a lot of setbacks because we want to work on a mobile application, but we need to set up all of these other environments. And this is like, there's a lot of headache in this. And like we took like a week setting up this project, just getting the backend running. And then there's also another project called Valid. It's an AI company based in the US. They are building a project as well, a marketing project for social media platforms. But I say that just to give an example of like the exposure I have in this situation, and knowing the pain points specifically around working with projects that don't have Docker setup, right? So immediately I get assigned to a new project to lead it or like maybe work on anything. The first thing I always look at is, does this project have Docker installed? Immediately I see Docker installed, I'm smiling already because I know, okay, I don't need to stress about like setting everything up. I just need to run Docker containers, run some Docker commands, and like I have everything running and everything is set up. And for those projects that don't have Docker set up, like it takes a lot of time to get things running. Most of the times once it's set up on the cloud, like the clients themselves, they don't really think much about updating documentations to have it run on local environments properly. And there's a lot of missing configurations, and like discussing with clients, getting it running is like a really huge pain point. It usually takes roughly projects to be set up in like our company like a week, where we have like just project setup. And imagine if all projects had like Docker installed on them. Like this would facilitate the setup, and like we can start working on features and like tickets as soon as possible, and like this brings in more revenue to the company faster. So that's just like a highlight on like my exposure to this environment, and like what are like the benefits of having Docker immediately set up in a project when it comes to onboarding into instances. And this if you have worked on like open source as well, you definitely have noticed that this is also something that greatly impacts how fast you can contribute to projects and like communities if they have Docker set up or not. So that's for like people that are into open source, they could have had a bit of exposure with that. So this brings me to the main pain points around the whole idea of like having Docker setup versus not having Docker setup. I am very confident, and I can guarantee that all the developers in this call have said this statement at least once. Like, it runs on my machine, right? And we have the comment section. If you haven't said this before, put it in the comment section and let me debunk that, because I'm pretty sure like everybody has said this before. You work on a project on your local system, and then you have it running. If it's a web app, it's a web page, whatever, you have it set up, and then it's now time for you to demo it to somebody. You have it on GitHub, and then you tell them to clone it and like test it on their end. Maybe you're working with somebody, collaborating with somebody, and you tell them to pull this on their end and test it, and immediately they pull it, it's breaking, it's not starting. Now, what's the problem here? It's working on my machine, but it's not working on your end. But there's a lot that goes into it. Your system is already like configured to run this project from when you started working on it. Especially if it's like a very complicated project, then that becomes a huge mess as well. So this like brings us to like the main points, which is like you have it running on your end, but all of the configurations the same on the other person's end as well. Maybe you're running Node version 18, you're running, you have like some Postgres database which is using like Postgres 15, you're running with some backend or some different versions of packages on your end, and your project is set up to run with those. But somebody else might be using Node version 20, might be running on the latest Postgres versions, for example, using a different version of the application, or like different versions of different packages compared to what you have installed on your end. And it might not necessarily work on your end, and there's no way you can guarantee this. There are two things you can either do. You can either deploy this application in a containerized environment and have them test it on their end, or you set up containers and like have them pull it on their end, run those containers, and then they won't fall into any of these headaches, and like there won't be any confusions around it working on your end and not working on their end. So that's the main pain point around this. And this brings us like to the main core of the matter here, Docker, and like what Docker is and how Docker really can facilitate our lives as developers, not as DevOps engineers or whatever. Even as developers, we need Docker. We should be familiar with Docker as a tool that we have in our belt and something we are able to use in our day-to-day lives. When you have small projects, set up Docker and like have it familiarize yourself with it is the main pain point. And like what the simple like definition of like what Docker is, as I put it there, Docker is a tool that lets us package an application, like it has like different dependencies that can be set up as containers. And we can think of this as we have different like shipping containers, and each of these has like specific requirements that allow the entire like environment to run. And we can have like different environments for different tools. So we can have different containers for different tools in our applications that serve different purposes. And like that's how we can visualize Docker as a tool for developers. So let's think of this in that light. And one thing I want to keep hammering on is Docker is not just for DevOps, right? We have exposure to a lot of different applications that we're working on. We have like our side projects that we're working on. We have a lot of these different tools that we're working on. Like one way we can get started with Docker and like familiarizing ourselves with it is starting those side projects, setting up small Docker containers for those. If we have like projects that are like maybe have UIs or services, CRUD endpoints, set up CD and CI pipelines, set up deployment workflows using Docker. These are different ways that developers can use Docker. Like if you've worked in a production or like in a relatively stable or relatively big company, you always know they have like deployment pipelines, they have like CI/CD checks, and a lot of different workflows that are there when you that run the applications on like GitHub or like Gitbucket or whatever to deploy maybe to staging, run tests, run link checks, and whatever. And all of this we can use Docker to like set up all of these environments. So I really want us to refrain from the idea of like Docker is just for DevOps, but seeing Docker as a tool that we can use as developers to share projects, like set up environments, and like set up different tools. So I think the major message here is like Docker is a powerful tool that we can all have in our belts as developers and as engineers in general when working. And like if we also think of like the industry today, a lot of new job requirements in general always ask for people that have experience in like Docker as well. It's like a requirement, but like it's a nice to have, and those that know Docker already or like familiar with Docker have a greater advantage, right? And that brings us to the next point, right? So why should developers even care, right? Why should developers care? It saves us a lot of time, especially when setting up new environments, when starting on new projects, and it's also a good tool to have in our belt. It speeds up workflows. Imagine if I have a project and I want, let's say, Engineer Lloyd to test it out, and he needs to go through like 20 steps to get a project running. Meanwhile, he could have simply run it using Docker, for example, and I get a project up and running instantly. So it like facilitates the whole workflow. You can easily iterate on ideas, on workflows, and everything much faster if we have like this environment set up around Docker, containerized, and like ready to go in just like a single command. So I really like that's the mindset shifts I want everybody in this call to have, like start thinking in that direction. And I also have a small demo setup where I want 2 volunteers in the call to can raise your hand or you can drop an emoji. I want 2 people that would help me run an application I have. It's on GitHub. It's an open repo. It's public. This will just be used to demonstrate how we can easily, or like how Docker helps us to easily set up environments, application and run projects instantly. So I have like this project of mine, and I want us to just quickly test it out and see what it looks like. So let me. I see we have Yaya raised his hand. I want someone else to.
Yeah, I'm happy to volunteer because I'm also recording.
Okay, that's fine. So I think we could let me share. I think here. So I just share the link to the project. It's available on GitHub. You should be able to see this. So I think I want like you, Loe and Yaya, can you guys please quickly clone this project down to your local environments? And then I think we will start with Yaya. Once you have cloned it, maybe you can, if you have like environment, if you have like a computer with you, you can share your screen, and then we will just go through like setting up the project, and we'll go through the README and just try to set this project up and run it locally, and let's see. Oh, yeah. So yeah, just let me know once you're ready. I'll stop sharing and then you can take over.
Sure. All right, I think I am done.
Okay, can you share your screen? That's fine. Okay. Awesome. Can you open the project? Let's just try to set it up and run it on your end. Awesome. So the project has, so basically it's a Next.js application, and it runs, also it uses Postgres as the database, and then it also, we have like PNPM running with Node version 6, Node version 18. So can we start by running, just installing dependencies? I think it uses PNPM, not NPM. Yeah. So I would like to see, you guys are seeing how things are going. Just to have an idea of like what it takes to run the project. Okay, so we are installing dependencies. So once that's done, we would also need to configure. So do you have, I'd say you have PG admin set up. We will need to configure like we need to create a table, and then also run a few queries to create some enums as well. And then we'll configure that URL as an env in an env file. So I say we have a .env example. Can you copy that and then create an env file from that? And then if you have that setup, we can also try to see if we can get the database up and running as well. Yes, so in the Postgres database to run that as well. So can you
okay, you want us to create like a new Postgres database?
Yes, so we need a Postgres database to connect to the application.
All right.
Yeah, so if you can, this just goes to demonstrate the whole like idea of how complicated it might be to run the project locally.
All right.
So no way we will come to you once EI is done. But yeah, if that sounds like if that's a headache to you, or like it's complicated or whatever, we can skip the step. We can pause running the project entirely and then go to Loe and then see how Loe can run this project easily on its
own. All right. All right. Yeah, I think the thing is I have to probably look to create a new database.
Exactly.
take the URL, put it there, and stuff like that. So it takes a lot of time, and if you are not someone that is used to using Postgres, then you have to do like some extra research and stuff like that to get the project running.
Exactly. So that's actually my point. And if you go to the README, the .readme, there you will see we also have. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you'd also see we have to like create like specific like product people, and they also need to create like different enums as well that are needed in the application. So this all just goes to show how complicated it might be to like set up this. It's not straightforward. You don't just install it and like run it. So thanks for volunteering and showing that up. I think Loe, if you have cloned the project, we can like demonstrate how easy it is to get this up and running with Docker.
Okay, so if I understand let me share my screen.
Yeah.
So I was taking a look at the README. For the initial setup, what I need is a Postgres database and.
So in your situation, we are not going to go through this route. We are just going to run the project with Docker.
Okay.
So can you, if you have a Docker desktop, can you start up your Docker desktop, and then in the command line, just run this command here that I'll be sharing in the chats.
Okay.
Yep. So if you have Docker desktop, then just run this command. Just run a build, and then the project should. So what that command is going to do is it's going to spin up a new environment. It's going to create a Postgres database for us, configure like the passwords, the name, and everything, expose that port as well, and then it's going to run the application itself. It configures the environment variables, and then it also runs a seeder as well. That also runs a couple of commands that seed data into our database immediately. This can all be done by just that one Docker command that does everything. But if we were to go with the other route, the way Yaya was going to do it, we would have to do all of this manually. So we would need to first of all like have a database running, configure that database, right? And then once we have that database running, we would then need to pull in all of those setups into our own env. And then once we have that running, we then need to also seed data as well. So those are like a couple of steps just to get the application, just to get this simple application running. So let's just see how easy it is for us to run this project with Docker. So right now, Lowe just run the Docker Compose up build command. So this starts up Docker Compose, and then like it builds the project. So here it's extracting all of the information, downloading the different Docker images. It's running a build, adding the necessary users. Now it's running and npm run build. It's building the front-end application. There we can see it. Resolving all of that.
Why that is running, if you let me, Abdul.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
So the idea is, in this Docker file, we have been able to package or specify all the dependencies that this application needs to run. So we are building this application from a node-based image which already has node and npm installed, and we copy over the application files into this image, because essentially Docker just creates a virtual machine of some sorts. So we copy over the application code from this directory into the image that we are building, and we install the dependencies in the image and set up all the other dependencies that we need for this application to run into this one Docker file. Then in the Docker Compose file, we added the the other services that this application is dependent on, like database. So we had this, when we run this Docker build, just as I did right now, the first thing it did was download this image that already exists. You will find that there are Docker images for public services that we all use, like Postgres databases and every other application that we normally install on our machines. These images already exist out there, so this downloads it and puts it in the same sort of network with the Docker with the node application that we just built. And you were explaining about this seeder part. I'm not sure I totally got it, but I think the idea is this seed is something that is supposed to run to, like, it's like migrations, is it?
Yeah, so it's like it runs some seed scripts that it emulates like seeding the data, and like it adds a bunch of data into our database as well.
Okay, so we are able to mount this as well with the Docker file as well.
Yep. So if you quickly look at your terminal, you're going to see a bunch of like.
Is this big enough? Do I make it big enough? Can you see it?
Yeah, no, I think that's visible enough.
Okay.
So there we see the application started. If we look up there, like Postgres was initialized successfully.
Yeah.
After the containers were downloaded and started, the schemas there, the database was created, the type was added, the table was created, the schemas were also configured properly. And then if we look down, the data also, the application, front-end application started running, and then we seeded the data into the database. And all of that happened with just running one command, one Docker command. And if Lowe visits his local host right now, we should also see the application running. Yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to do that. Okay. Let me share my local host.
Yeah, just open Twitter.
Okay, let me share the full screen now. Yeah, localhost.
Yeah, 3000.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So and just like that, Lowe was able to start up the entire application with just one command, and we have like a full-fledged UI running. These are like what we are seeing here, the products that were seeded into the database, and like we have everything running with just one command. If we didn't go with like Docker, we would still be setting up like databases and like trying to make sure everything runs properly or whatever. So this is just like an example to show us how like easy Docker can like facilitate our lives as developers if we have it set up in our projects. Think of it as like you build a new application, you want to share it with everybody. There's really no way you can. The easiest way you can do that is by setting up Docker, and like anybody can easily pull this on their end and like run Docker commands and like have it showing up. So this is what Lowe is looking at. Is like a template. It's a dashboard template application provided to us by Vercel Next.js. So that's what I cloned and I wrapped it in Docker to have it easily set up for everyone else. Like even they don't have like Docker containers for this, and like to have it run, you need to go the route here I was trying to do. But with wrapping it with Docker right now, it's way easier to wrap this template and like have it running on your end and like extend it and build more features out of it. So yeah, I think that was like what I wanted to demonstrate here. Yeah, thank you so much, Lowe and Aya, for participating. Yeah, I think I can take over and start sharing.
Okay.
All right. So I think one other thing I wanted to demonstrate is remember at the beginning of the talk, I also said something about how I work with like multiple, like there's a project that I'm currently working on that requires the end application that requires us to run in a backend, for example. And that application, it's a good example of what a complicated like backend service looks like in production. This application is like for a finance company. Here we can see it has like a bunch of containers, for example. You see here they are running Postgres. That's one of the services. They have another one for NGX. They also have a service which starts up the back end. And then this back end also like relies on like the database, the Postgres database, Kafka. They also have a front end UI that's running here. They have like a Zookeeper database, another Kafka service, a Kafka UI service. They have Grafana, and like a bunch of services that are running. They also have another one here, which is also another service that runs a separate MVP backend. And this project has about, if I can count properly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, it has about like 10 different services that are running just to have the front end, just to have one single front end consume everything. So it's like a great example of what a complicated backend looks like. So imagine if I were to actually try to run this application itself, run all of these services on my local environment without using Docker. It'll be like a nightmare for me, right? But I'm able to do this with just a single command. We have like the backend running here. We have both backends running here flawlessly without any issues. So this is another great example of what or like the benefits of Docker, like having it as part of our workflows as developers. But it saves us a lot of time, and it helps us iterate faster and like work on new software, test different things a lot faster compared to if we were just trying to run everything by ourselves and like having the entire application function the way we are used to doing it, like running everything manually. So that's like the demonstration I wanted to show us of like what are some of like real life examples of Docker. So with this, I just want us to also think about like what this has, right? What are like the impacts this can have on you as a developer, right? Imagine instead of taking 2 days to set up a project and run it, you're able to run this project in like a couple of minutes to an hour. You can see how much time that saves you as a developer. Imagine like running multiple databases without needing to like set up anything on your end. Imagine like you don't need to have Postgres. Lowe didn't need to have Postgres set up to run it. But for you to run that project, you needed to have Postgres first set up. And like to run the application, Lowe didn't need to create any databases, didn't need to create any tables, didn't need to seed any data. But if you needed to run the project, you would have needed to create a table, create those types, seed the data before getting to run the application and like iterate and move fast. So that's the kind of impact Docker has to us as developers. And I think of a situation where you are building microservices, where you have like multiple like environments hosted in the cloud, and you want to do all of this, and it's going to be practically impossible to run this if they are not containerized, right? All of the big companies out there that have multiple microservices, you think of like the Netflix, YouTube, and all of these other companies that have different microservices. They are all containerized and like deployed on the cloud. That's the only way they can do it. They can't rely on like running this on like the servers systems directly. That wouldn't work at the scale at which they are working on. And as developers, we also need to think of it this way. And another thing as well is like this opens up more job opportunities to us as developers. But if you are applying for a job role and one of the good to haves is Docker experience, or like being able to write small Docker files, create small containers, or like set up workflows, build CI/CD pipelines. You as a developer that has some knowledge in like Docker, you have a better chance of getting those jobs than a developer that doesn't, right? So that's also a key advantage to have as a developer. And learning developer learning Docker is a way of investing in your own career growth, because once you build all the applications you can build, or like learn how to write all the crude endpoints, you need to start learning how to like ship this, hosting this environment, like deploying all of this. And like the easiest way you can do all of this is by wrapping them in Docker containers and running them in any environment. A lot of services support Docker, and that's the easiest way you can any type of application hosted anywhere is by running it through Docker. So that's really something I want to emphasize on. And the key idea here is like Docker isn't just a deployment tool; it's also a developer's tool, and it's very important that we have this in mind as we use these tools and as we work on new projects and build the next side projects that we are working on. So I think the easiest way to get started is to, whenever you start a new project, have once you have it running, set up Docker immediately as well. Especially on your small projects, start testing out Docker, playing with it, like seeing how it works. So that's like one thing I want us to all take away from this whole conversation as a whole. So I think that brings us to the end. Thank you for listening. And in case you have any other questions or any other inquiries, you can reach out to me on my email. You can also check out this project, the template project, on my GitHub repository as well. So with that, I will hand the mic to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer Abdoul, for the wonderful presentation, a wonderful session. I just want to know if you have any questions from the attendees. Does anyone have a question for Engineer Abdoul?
Yeah, I think I have a few.
All right, shoot.
Okay. So you talked about how the impact of Docker, the impact Docker has on you as a developer when it comes to initial project setup and portability of the project. But I would like to know, on your day-to-day, how does this actually affect your development workflow? Like, does it exact any benefits to you during development, and does it add any value to you as a team during development after project setup?
Yeah. So it's like the time it takes, just the time it saves me as a developer is invaluable. I can't emphasize that enough. Imagine every time you need to start working on an application, you need to run 10 services. That's like a nightmare. So imagine every day if I was to start working on the NSAID mobile application I was working on, I needed to take about 1 hour just to run all of the different services. And like some services depend on others, so I need to run this before running this. So it's just the time alone that it saves me is like very, very massive. And then apart from that, when working, if we like to during like Q&A sessions, for example, QA people also need to test, for example, new features and new implementations that we are working on. And imagine, let's say we have QA people that are working on 2 different projects, and every time they need to work on your project, they need to run, or they need to test out the features you're building, they need to run 10 different services. That's a nightmare for QA as well. So having it set up with Docker allows QA as well to immediately start, like build the containers and have the project up and running in like 15 minutes, and they're able to test any new features that are implemented. So just the time alone that it saves, the stress it saves developers to like set up these environments and like having it running. Even though you have it set up, the time it takes to run it as well is like really, it's invaluable. So just that alone is like a massive benefit to the team in general. Yeah. And it impacts how fast you can ship as well, how fast you can work on features and deliver features to clients. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I know we've talked about a lot of advantages and benefits, but I think we can agree there's no tech tool without any drawbacks. So what would you say are the drawbacks to adopting Docker at the development stage?
I think like any other dev tool out there, like picking it up there's a curve to learning it. I wouldn't say for Docker it's a steep curve. It's also depending on how far you want to go with it. If you want to get to the level of just being able to run containers, like create different services and like run them, it doesn't require a lot of knowledge. You can get started on that fairly, I wouldn't say easily, but I think for me, one of the only drawbacks or like one of the drawbacks I would say is like the learning curve. Another would be not all systems are able to support or like Docker itself, because it's a resource demanding software, especially if you want to run large amounts of containers and whatever in your local environment. It takes a lot of resources. So if you don't have a powerful enough machine, you might not be able to run it as well. But I think from my experience, like using it so far, and like looking at watching other people use it as well, those are like the two major things I've come across in general. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Usmaila, thank you very much for the session. I have like a question, and I think well, from what I've been seeing, it's like, Docker is mostly valuable for people that are like in large systems or systems that have like moving parts that communicate with other systems. Like for example, if you're having a full stack application, right? So let's say you have things like Redis, you have your backend, you have your database and stuff like that. Is it also useful to use Docker, for example, if you have a single application, like let's say, okay, just a React Native application. In that case, where, okay, you only have a React Native application and it doesn't have a backend, you just use endpoints to communicate, to fetch data and do stuff like that, and you can directly ship your application to the App Store using something like EAS, for example. Like in that case, do you still need Docker?
I think it depends on it would depend on the specific projects as well. But regardless of, let's say for example, the example of React Native, right? We could still set up like Docker we can have like different workflows in our application that are built using Docker, for example. Like you gave an example of using ESS. We could also run builds in our pipelines that make sure that the application builds properly and like is running as well. So before shipping it or like deploying it to staging, you might after a pull request, let's say, suppose you want to maybe make sure that it builds successfully, it runs properly. So we could also have this configured to run like in a Docker environment or like in a GitHub workflow. So that's a use case. I think even with the project I am currently working on, they have like a workflow that once the application builds it before it's deployed to a staging environment. But depending on the applications, it might be limited as well. And we also need to think of it as a tool. So just because you have a tool, you don't necessarily need to use it in all situations. You need to use it where it matters as well. So for example, like React Native might be a limited case where maybe you might not use it that much. But if you have like a web application where you need to maybe post it somewhere, in those situations, even if it's a single page application, for example, having it run on Docker where you can deploy it on like a very cheap deployment platform is a good use case, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be situations where we have multiple services that are communicating with each other before we have like Docker set up for the project. Yeah.
Okay. Because sometimes there are some projects that are just so small that you don't see the need for you to like do all that initial work to install Docker, configure something, because you don't even have many things to configure. So at that point, you feel like maybe setting up Docker is just for fancy because it's a good practice that everybody's recommending, right? So but yeah, thank you very much for this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Like if you have maybe you just started a simple application and it doesn't have anything very small, at that point setting up Docker might not be beneficial to you. Maybe once it's at the level of maybe you want to not deploy this, and then you don't want to maybe go with like a free service like Vercel. You want to go for a cheaper alternative where you self-host it, for example. Then at that point, maybe you take up Docker. Like mentioned, it's striking the balance between knowing where to use it and when not to use it as well. But having it as a tool in your belt is definitely an advantage.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. Awesome.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, mine is not a question. Rather, it's more of an appraisal and a thank you. I mean, even though I was in and out of the presentation, but I mean, I was the few things I got, I was able to love the presentation. So, Monsieur Abdoul, thank you so much for the powerful presentation. I mean, there was a lot to learn, and then also when you spoke about the aspect of at the beginning of the presentation, when you spoke about the aspect of it working on your computer and not working on, yeah. I mean, that's a peculiar problem that we face, and thankfully Docker has come to eradicate such. I mean, like for example, I could remember back then in school when you're trying to do a project and then it works on your computer and then on the day of the presentation it does not work. So
or you want to give it to somebody else who has the machine willing to present.
So I mean, that's how valuable Docker is, and it completely solves that issue. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more thing. I think it will be good to discuss. So sorry about that. In development, right? When you're working in a containerized environment, like the setups you just showed us, how practical is troubleshooting? Say maybe you deploy these applications and you encounter issues in production. How practical is it for you as a developer to be able to debug these different type of issues in a Docker environment? Because I think I have seen in some cases where, especially with some kind of Docker setups, like maybe with Laravel, where you need to forward all FPM requests to maybe a reverse proxy still within the container and things like that. And it's easy for some logs for some issues to not be very apparent. So I don't know, based on your experience, how would you say this setup affects troubleshooting from issues that arise in production?
Yeah, so I think it's a I don't know the word that is how they use it. Is it a pain and love relationship? So it will also depend on the kind of setups that the project has. So for example, in my situation, for example, where different services are within specific containers, it's fairly straightforward to debug. Because the logs are also visible where they are. We also know exactly where error logs are coming from. And we can look into each individual container and like figure out what's wrong with this specific part of like the service. But like you also mentioned, in situations where like everything, things are wrapped within a proxy, and like you might not be able to pinpoint where a specific error is coming from, then that's now like a nightmare situation when you're getting errors, but like pinpointing where exactly it's coming from is a problem. So those kinds of situations is also more challenging as compared to if you're running it locally. But ultimately, um, I would like to still believe it has more benefits than negative aspects of it when it comes to like, some of those challenges that come in it when it comes to running complex services. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and like maybe you also have some exposure on this. And like, what kind of like what are some measures you have in place? So like, how do you cope with these type of situations as like a DevOps engineer working with like multiple playing a bit like this is your environment, it's your bread and butter. So how do you go about it? What are like, any points or advices you can share?
Yeah, so this is usually a point where I think it's important for the dev and the ops to communicate properly, because you have an expectation. There's a particular architecture that you have for your application that we have to just simply reproduce in Docker. But sometimes for the specific case of Laravel, like I mentioned, there are some specific Laravel setups where if you have to the PHP process manager, for instance, when you have a proxy in front of the process manager, you don't see the logs from the process manager in the container. You see just the logs from the reverse proxy. So the idea, I think that worked for us was to separate these concerns and I think we ended up having like 4 different containers at some point, so that we can each process manages its own container, and we can see what is happening at each stage of the trace flow, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that is one way. So my point is it's important for the teams to talk. I know there's a lot of automation going on with these setups and all, but it's always important for people to talk to each other, because especially when it comes to troubleshooting, when an issue could be coming from more than one place, it's a good idea to not focus too much on the tool, but the architecture you have going on. So Docker is fine, Docker works okay, but maybe your setup could do with some change at that point. So yeah, that's what worked for us anyway. I'm not sure if other people have encountered this issue. That's why I asked. But it would have been nice to know, I guess. Yeah. All right, I think that's it for me. I don't know if anyone else has a question or something to discuss about this point.
Yeah, I guess for me it would be more of like just a question for Mr. Abdoul. So it's still about Docker. So what do you think about like, for example, you spoke about having being in an environment where you have different services communicating with each other. So how do you scale like different containers? Let's take, for example, that you have an environment where you have like 10 plus containers, and maybe there's a traffic, there's each of those containers represent an application, and maybe that application is having some traffic spikes, like traffic is too much on that application. So like, have you encountered in a scenario where you have to manually scale those containers, and what did you use to scale those, such that once there's traffic, another container automatically created to take care of that traffic, for instance?
I don't have much experience dabbling in that side.
Okay.
So it's mostly been around working with them locally on my environment, but not necessarily deploying and like playing with that part of the infra. But I don't know, like just from what I've been like the buzzword of stuff I've read, I think we have. I don't know if this is where Kubernetes comes in.
Exactly.
But able to like now scale up and down containers based on resource requirements. So
right. I want to talk about I want to talk about Docker Swarm too. You instead of using most particularly startups they are one thing that affects them also cost, having to deal with the cost that has to do with running a Kubernetes cluster. So an option that could be cheaper for managing such traffic level could be setting up an environment using Docker Swarm that will automatically orchestrate the containers, where you can have container automatically created when there are traffic points depending on your configuration. Yeah, so I wanted just to know if you have an idea of that, and then also to propose that alternative also. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's nice to know. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Great.
Yep. I think in the absence of any other questions or points, this brings me to the end of my presentation. I thank you all for the questions, and thank you all for participating as well. Yeah, over to you, Stephanie.
All right, thank you so much, Engineer Abdoul, for the interactive session, and thank you everyone for joining and for interacting. I will just wish everyone a great weekend, and see you on our next webinar.
Thank you.